Welcome back to part two of the factorization video. So in the previous video, we looked at four questions, four examples of how to factorize by using highest common factor. Now we are going to look at some more questions. So I have 5 questions that I want you guys to pause the video, I want you to attempt them, and then resume the video to see if you are on the right track. So let's go. So the first question, 3xy plus 4xy squared. So the highest common factor for the 8 and the 4 would be 4. Good. For the x, it would be x, and for the y and y squared would be y. 4 into 8 goes 2 times x1, y1, so we're just left with 2. 4 into 4 goes 1 time, so plus 1. X into x goes 1 times, y into y squared goes y. So it'd be 1y, and again, we don't have to write the 1. So our answer is 4xy bracket 2 plus y. Our second one, coefficient would be 9, and the highest power, or the highest common factor for the m would be m squared, because that is the highest power common to all of the terms. So that would be our common factor, and in bracket, we're just going to divide, so 9 into 9 goes 1 time, and m squared into m cubed leaves us with 1m, with an m. 9 into negative 9 goes negative 1, m squared into m squared goes 1. So therefore, our answer is 9m squared bracket 1m minus 1. And again, so sometimes persons tend to, just write the m in the bracket. That would be incorrect, because when you multiply that, you would not get this expression right there. Or some persons put minus 0. No. Remember, when you're dividing something, you always get, when you're dividing a particular term by itself, you always get 1, not 0. So we have to write the 1, right? Or you're going to get it incorrect. All right, let's move to the third example. Now, looking at this, Jesus. Persons were, the first thing that comes to mind would, this is hard, I don't know how to do this, but it is rather simple. It's just like what we've been doing for this video. So this is one term right here, and this is another term, right? Now, do we see anything common to both terms? So again, this is one term, this is another term. What is common to both terms? So if you figure it out, you can just copy yourself. So the p plus 2 is common to both. So that would be the highest common factor. And all you're doing is divide both terms. So the x bracket p plus 2 by the p plus 2. And that's just cancel. We're just going to cancel those, and we're left with an x. And for the second term, p squared in p plus 2 into our second term would leave us with a plus 6. All right, so let's move to number 4. Now, number 4, like quite a few of the previous ones, I might not have said it, but there are 2 ways that we could work this out, right? So we can see that all 3 coefficients are negative. So the first way that we could work this out is that we could factor out that negative. So we have a 9 and the 81 and a 90. We see that the highest common factor would be a 9. But we could factor out that negative as well. So take out that negative. All right, so for the variables, we have m squared, m cubed, and m squared. So m squared would be the highest common factor. And n squared, and n to the 4th power. So we have to use n squared. So the highest power that is common to all 3 terms. And then we're going to just write our quotients in the bracket. So negative 9 into negative 9 give us a positive 1. M squared into m squared goes 1. N squared into n squared goes 1. So we're left with a positive 1. Negative 9 into negative 81 gives us a positive 9. M squared into M cubed gives us a M. N squared into N squared gives us 1. So we're left with plus 9M. Now our final term, negative 9 into negative 90, gives us a positive 10. M squared into M squared gives us a 1. And N squared into N to the 4th power gives us N squared. Just like that. So that's our answer right there. So you realize that in the bracket, each of the terms become positive, yes? Or we could just, we didn't have to factor out the negative. So we could have just said that the highest common factor is a positive M squared N squared. And let's look what would get in the bracket. So 9 into negative 9 will give us a negative 1. M squared into M squared will give us 1. N squared into N squared will give us 1. So we're left with a negative 1. Negative 81 divided by positive 9 would give us a negative 9. And then the M squared into the M cubed would give us a M. And N squared into N squared would give us 1. And negative 90 divided by 9 would give us a negative 10. M squared into N squared would give us 1. And N squared into the N to the 4th power would give us N squared. So what do you realize between both of these? Great. So when we factor out that negative, each of the term inside of the bracket will become positive, right? And this is the case when all three terms are negative. So when we factor out that negative sign right there, yes, we see that all of the terms inside of the bracket become positive. But if we use a positive highest common factor, we don't factor out the negative, then each of the terms will remain negative inside of the bracket. That's the only difference. So any one of these ways that you work it out, you're going to get the marks once you do it properly. And if we were supposed to expand these, it doesn't matter. We're going to still get back the same answer. So now that you know that you can factor out, a negative if you have a negative. We could also do it with number 5, right? So we could have factor out. So we see that the common factor for 20 and 5 would be 5. So we could factor out a 5, or we could factor out a negative 5. So we're going to do both. So let's factor out the 5. So the 5. And for the A, we see that A is common. For the B's, we see that the highest power would be B squared. For the C, the highest power would be C squared. And we would not write the D because it is not common to both terms, right? So it'd be positive 5AB squared C squared. And when we divide both terms by our highest common factor here, 5 into 20 gives us 4. A into A goes 1. B squared into B cubed leaves us with a B. C squared into C to the 4th power will leave us with C squared. And we have to write back our D, right? Minus, so 5 into negative 5 will give us a negative 1. A into A goes 1. B squared into B squared goes 1. C squared into C squared goes 1. Or if we factor out that negative, as I said before, then the only difference would be that the signs in the bracket will change. So if we use negative 5AB squared C squared, then in the bracket, instead of having a positive 4B C squared D, you would have a negative. It would be negative 4B C squared D. And instead of having a minus 1, you would have a plus 1. Because remember, when we multiply the highest common factor by each of the terms inside of the bracket, you must get back our original expression, which is 20AB cubed C to the 4th power D minus 5AB squared C squared.
Nice. I'm glad I come out, comes to this. Nah, like, I fear it's just going to sit me never there, so I'm just choke myself.
Alright, so remember that algebra is one of those topics that require practice. So the more you practice this concept, the easier it will come to you. So feel free to go over and look over those questions that we worked. And if you do have any more additional questions, feel free to post them, ask them in the comment section. Before you leave, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for more educational content.